Wailing Wall.
Huh?
Now I get it.
Changed since before. That's been
We really didn't hurt it. That's the Wailing Wall. That is the Wailing Wall. That is the Wailing Wall.
We're going down. We have time to go all.
Okay. Yeah, that has a purpose, huh?
Crowd control.
Yeah.
What do you call them? Shields.
Yeah, shields, yeah.
No wonder you're seeing like
Headsets on. Everybody got their headsets on?
It's on. It doesn't work.
Headsets on.
Jane, you on?
Yep.
I'm hearing you, Jane.
Yeah? Yeah? Yeah, so sort of stay close together in spite of everything up here at the moment. A little bit more presence of our police and so on today, being the 29th of November, the day that the UN passed the partition. So you understand it could be a little bit more edgy. But we're going to talk a little bit about the background of this area, and we're kind of throwing you in at the deep end because we haven't really looked at you, obviously, from the area of the Mount of Olives. Or we haven't also been to David City and talked about how Jerusalem sort of first started. So you're going to have to use a bit of imagination and try and follow along with me. But the very first time we hear about this area is actually with Abraham, and try and imagine it with nothing here whatsoever. It's the barren sort of hillsides of the Judean mountains. And Abraham, of course, is told by God to take the son that he waited for so long, the son that he loved so much, Isaac, and offer him as a sacrifice. And And so Abraham would have left his servants and so on over in the southern area, down sort of in that direction, and he comes with Isaac. And of course, Isaac is actually, I mean, he's a guy in his 30s. He's not some little boy like artwork always shows him as a little kind of guy, but he's not. He's a full adult young man, and he brings him up here. And so, of course, you know what happens about finding the ram in the thicket and the angel stopping him from doing so. But from then on, this place is known as Mount Moriah in Hebrew. And literally it means it will be provided by God. And that's exactly what happened. The ram was provided by God. And so that takes place somewhere on the top of this mountain. What you have to understand is that if you go down in that direction, you're coming up the slope, and eventually you'll go up to the top of the area of the bedrock, and somewhere up there, that is where Abraham binds Isaac. In the Muslim tradition, I mean, written in the Quran, it is Abraham that comes with Ishmael. Okay, so that's the first issue up here. Then we go on in time. We jump to 1004 BC. David, of course, was born in Bethlehem. By the time he's crowned king, he's crowned king in Hebron, and he's ruling from Hebron, which is further to the south. Bethlehem from here is about 4.5 miles to the south of us, and Hebron is about 28 miles to the south of us. And Hebron is in the tribe of Judah. And the big thing with David is that he unites the tribes, and he understands that whilst he has his capital in the tribe of Judah, the other tribes may be jealous. That it would be a good idea to have a neutral place as his capital. And so he decides, he's over in the area, probably standing somewhere in the area of the Mount of Olives, and he's looking across, and down below us, where I showed you those paintings and everything will be there tomorrow, was this little Jebusite town. It was a very safe little town. It tells us in the Bible that even if you put the lame and the blind and so on the walls, they could protect the city, because the city was naturally protected by the great Kidron Valley, which was to our left. Okay, you've got your Mount of Olives is over there, the Kidron Valley is down on that side, and coming from where we walked in and then came up the sort of ramp, that would have been the Tyropean or the Central Valley that goes down and meets David City at a point at the bottom. And so that little Jebusite city, protected by Kidron and the Tyropean, it's sometimes known also as the Central Valley. And David looks at it and he says, he knows, I mean, it's a neutral place, it belongs to the Jebusites, it's sort of sandwiched between Judah and Benjamin. And he sort of literally says, look, either will be my general will take that city for me. And Joab makes his way up through the water shaft that was there, gets in through the back door, literally, and he takes the city from the inside. And from then on, that becomes the capital of Israel, right, from 1004 BC. But then, of course, David eventually gets back the Ark of the Covenant from the Philistines. He's given them all that bad luck. They're all, sick. Their gods are all falling flat on their faces. Their statues of their gods, I should say, are all falling flat on their faces. The Philistines are glad to get rid of the Ark that's bringing them so much bad luck. It's received by the people of Beth Shemesh. From Beth Shemesh, it's taken to Kiryat Yearim, where it waits for about 20 years. And eventually David buys the threshing floor from the Jebusites, from a guy by the name of Aruna, or Ona in the Bible, you remember. And it's important to understand, because there is so much controversy about this little piece of real estate and so on. It tells us in the Bible, when David was fair, he didn't confiscate it, he paid money for this area, and he buys the threshing floor. So the little city is down below us, the threshing floor is up here. Remember, the threshing floor has to be the highest spot, so the chaff will blow away. And at the same time, the pagan sites of worship were always next to the threshing floor, because he always wanted to thank the gods for the wonderful harvest. And so in buying this threshing floor from the Jebusites, he's also negating the pagan site of worship that was probably here of the Jebusites. And of course, Solomon will build the first temple. And tomorrow in the little film at David City, you'll see what Solomon's temple looked like. But in those days, when you walked up to the temple, you don't have this little big platform on the top, okay? You're walking up the hill until you get to the temple. David's palace was down below. I'll show you tomorrow where David's palace was. And then you went on, you continued up the hill, and you come to the temple of Solomon. And it was a beautiful temple, magnificent, and so on. And we'll look at it in the film. They've done a beautiful representation of it. And so we talked about up at Tel Dan about the split in the kingdom after the death of Solomon. We have Judah down here in the south and the 10 tribes to the north. And eventually the northern tribes will fall to the Assyrians around 722 BC. Jerusalem gets this great population explosion at the time. People flood down, they settle on the next hill over. And then finally in 586, the Babylonians destroy Solomon's temple. It's wiped out completely. In fact, Jerusalem is wiped out and the people are taken to exile in Babylonia. And there they are in exile, and then 50 years later there is a change in the ruler over there, and a man by the name of Cyrus, he allows the Jews to come back. Now don't think all the Jews suddenly flooded back to this country. Many of them stayed over there in Babylonia. They longed for Jerusalem, they dreamt about Jerusalem, they stayed there in the area of the Tigris, Euphrates. And it was Nehemiah, remember, that brings them back together with Ezra. And tomorrow we're going to look at some of those walls that were rebuilt at the time of Nehemiah, and how everybody built their piece of wall and how fast they built. They rebuilt the walls of the city. And it was Zerubbabel who rebuilt the temple on the exact same spot that the Solomonic temple had stood. But those that had gone to exile as children, and they were seeing the magnificence of the Solomonic temple, they actually wept, because the little temple of Zerubbabel was so poor in comparison. They didn't have the money when they came back from exile, so they kind of made do, and they built the second temple. It's important to understand that it would have been built on the same spot. They knew where the first temple had stood. And then, of course, we come to the period of the Greeks. And when the Greeks are here, Alexander the Great literally conquers the world as it was known at that time. And with him came the Greek culture that was imposed on the peoples that came under the Greek control. In this country, it wasn't forced down on the Jewish people until a little bit later on, talking about Alexander around 333 BC. But by 167, there was a ruler in Greece by the name of Antiochus Epiphanes, and he actually considered that he was God. I mean, he was, really kind of out there. But anyway, he thought he was God, and he decided that everyone throughout the entire Greek Empire was going to celebrate his birthday on the 25th of every month. If you're king, you decide what you do, and if you want your birthday on the 25th of every month and everyone celebrates it, maybe it's a day off, maybe it's a good deal. But on the other hand, the Jewish people said absolutely fed out, said no way, because it meant leaving behind the Jewish calendar. And the Jewish calendar is completely different from anybody else's calendar. It goes according to the harvests, right? And it goes according to the moon. When you see the new moon, you know that that is the beginning of the new month. And it starts basically, the very first month of the year is Nisan, which is 14 days before Passover. Passover falls on the middle of the month, the 14th of the month of Nisan, when the moon is full. And at Passover, you brought the body to the temple. Okay, and then after Passover, you count off 49 days, that's exactly 7 weeks, and you get to the next feast, the Pilgrim Feast, which is Shavuot, the Feast of Weeks, because you're counting off the weeks, the counting of the Omer. And during that time, you would harvest all your other crops, your grain crops, with the ultimate one, of course, being the wheat. And by the time of the Feast of Weeks, Shavuot, all your wheat is in your storerooms. And then, of course, after that, you will count, you'll go through the summer months when only the dew is falling, and you'll start to harvest your other crops. So it would be the dates that you've seen, and the pomegranates and the figs, and the grapes, what have we done? Grapes, pomegranates, figs, dates, and I've forgotten one, olives. And of course, by the time you get to the Feast of Tabernacles, your storerooms are all full. And so now you can thank God for the wonderful fact that your storerooms are full, and then it starts off again. Because then you get into the time of November and you start to sow the wheat. Once again, you've seen it all growing. In this last few days, it's been beautiful. You can see the wheat starting to grow, the winter wheat. Remember, you pray for the former rain so that the earth will soften, the wheat will germinate, just like we had now. You see the wheat growing. And you want the rain, you pray for the rain in its season so that it's raining through the winter months so that the wheat gets to the highest level. You pray for the latter rain so that it will finish it off by the end of March, April. It will grow as best it possibly can. And then, of course, it should dry off so that you can harvest it in time for Shavuot. You see, I mean, it is an agricultural calendar. It goes according to the harvest. So it is a lunar calendar in as much as you see the new moon. But then, because if you do a purely lunar calendar, what happens then is that after a few 2 years or so, your harvests will start, 3 years, 4 years, your harvests are going to fall in the winter, and then it's not going to work, and so on. So every third year we stick in enough extra months, all right, and it swings it back again. So every year the calendar is changing by about 10 days. That's why when somebody who's Jewish, you all of a sudden find that the Jewish New Year, Rosh Hashanah as it's known, is on a different date. Sometimes it's in September, sometimes it's October. That is because we add the extra month in. It's swinging backwards and forwards because it's got to fit with the harvests and the rainfall. Nobody else has a calendar like that, and nobody in ancient times had one day of rest in every week. I mean, the Greeks wrote about it. What is this that you have a day off in the middle, the end of the week? No one had heard of anything like that. And so, very important, the Jewish calendar is totally different from any other calendar in the world. And so when this guy comes along, this Greek king, and says, okay, you're going to celebrate my birthday, it meant accepting the Greek calendar. And the Jews said, no way, you're not going to do that. He was furious, like, how dare you not do that? And so what did he do? He brought the god Zeus and put it in the temple in Jerusalem. And at the same time, he ordered that a pig be slaughtered at the altar. Can you imagine a non-kosher animal slaughtered pig's blood at the altar? That's what led to the Maccabean revolt. And at that point, we get the Greeks out through literally guerrilla warfare of Judah the Maccabean, his brothers, and so on. And very organized Greek armies are thrown out of the country, and then we have a period of freedom. And it's about 100 years of Jewish freedom. And at that point, in order to, the temple has been defiled, and so they rededicate the temple, they purify the temple, and the fact that it had the god in it and Zeus in it and the blood at the altar. And Hanukkah means to rededicate, so that is a man-made holiday, a miracle holiday basically, that falls in the winter time, which is kind of convenient because in the winter time, what's going on in this country? Basically nothing. You've harvested all the things that's in your storeroom for tabernacles, and then there's a period literally when it's dark early, and you don't really have anything until Passover. I mean, that's like 5 months of nothing, and so it is very convenient to have a feast of lights, because what the story goes is that there was just enough oil for one day for the 7-branch candelabra that was left. It was possible to use, and it took 8 days to crush the olives, to prepare the oil for the candelabra. But the oil, actually there was a miracle, and that one day's oil lasted for 8. And so that's why you have that different candelabra that you use at Hanukkah, which means rededication, repurification of the temple. And it was nice to have a little feast of lights put all of a sudden into a period of darkness. So that is a man-made holiday. And so now we get a sort of a cleanup of the temple and a refurbishing a little bit of the temple during this period of Jewish freedom, Hasmonean period. But then in 63 BC, the Romans appear here, and they allow the Hasmonean family to continue ruling. But then there is issues within the line of the Hasmoneans in 40 BC, and it looks like civil war is going to, happen here in the country, which is at which point Antipater, the father of Herod, a converted Jew, he comes from the area of Idumea. His wife is still a Nabatean princess, sends Herod, who's been educated in Rome, over to Rome, play your cards right, you could become the next king of the Jews, because his second marriage of Herod the Great was to a Jewish princess, a member of that royal family, Mariam. His first wife was actually also a Nabatean princess. So here is Herod, married into the royal family, technically not considered Jewish, comes back from Rome. He does all kinds of things to try and appease the Jewish people. I mean, he's playing a double standard all the time, pro-Roman, pro-Jewish, and of course what he does to be pro-Jewish is to refurbish the temple that stood here in Jerusalem. So he doesn't take it down, it's still the second temple, but he turns it into one of the most magnificent buildings in the Roman Empire. So what you have to imagine, first of all, he builds up this great platform that we're standing at, and underneath us in this point and all around down to the corner are great, huge arches that are holding up the weight of this platform, and around it to hold up the weight of the platform are the great retaining walls that Herod built. And they were huge. I mean, they came up, if we would be standing here, the walls around us of the platform would tower about to the height of the present day cypress trees. So understand that would be the height of that. And then the actual height of the temple that Herod refurbished here is another twice as high as what is the Dome of the Rock today. All right, so the height of the Dome of the Rock would be the height of the doorway of the temple. The building that you're in, Leonardo Plaza, if you get rid of the little bit on the top of it, it has actually 23 stories, I think, on the buttons of the elevator. The temple stood 22 stories high. Try to